Hello, welcome to another episode of Album Musings. So, this week we're taking a look at Script for a Jester's Tear. Now, this was released on the 14th of March 1983. I'm recording this on the 14th of March 2023. So, 40 years ago. And I'm going to do the usual thing here. I just go through, look at some stats around the album generally, who was involved, how many tracks there were on the album, how many singles, and then we'll look at the chart performance on the UK charts, and then talk a little bit about 1983 generally. It's a really interesting album to do a set musings about because you have a neo-prog band who essentially you would expect would have been completely, what's the word, like persona non gratis, I don't know if that's the correct way of saying it, around this time, actually having single chart success in the UK. And I've probably said it on numerous times, like the beginning of the 80s in the UK singles charts is super interesting in terms of what was there. So we'll take a look at the ecosystem, the musical ecosystem in the UK around the time this album came out, and the singles. So eventually achieved platinum certificate, and there were 2 singles off of this album. I'm going to also talk about the single that the band released before the album was released. So it was a non-album single. Well, strictly speaking, it would have been an EP, and we'll see why in a moment. So yeah, 14th of March 1983. And they'd been going since 79. Now there's 2 phases to the band. There's the Fish phase, as Fish as a lead singer, and then there's the Steve Hogarth era. I'm actually more familiar with the Fish era. That's the band that I, if you like, I became familiar with because they were around at the time that I was listening to the Friday Rock Show, and that's how I got exposed to Marillion. I wasn't that interested in the original prog bands. I mean, I did have the odd Yes album. I'd certainly heard other albums from that time period, like Genesis, bands like that, but I hadn't really been sucked in. At this time I was still heavily invested in buying albums within the area of the new wave of British heavy metal and all the other bands that were having success off the back of that were non-UK bands. So that's where my sort of allegiances lie. But I couldn't help but getting exposed to Marillion because Marillion was being played on the Friday Rock Show alongside the stuff that I was listening to, like Iron Maiden and Angel Witch and Saxon and the Scorpions and bands like that, Judas Priest, Motorhead. So yeah, it's difficult to escape them, and it's always fascinated me how they managed to get chart success. And you'll see in a moment later on in the mid-80s just how high up the singles charts the band actually managed to get during this period. So they're often referred to as a neo-prog band, which is a subgenre of progressive rock. It developed in the early 1980s. Marillion is the most popular example of that genre. But there's a whole load of other bands that I was aware of that were bubbling away, and some of these probably still tour today. So you got bands like Palace. I remember buying this album when it came out in 84. We got Pendragon, 12th Night, had the Art and Illusion album that was pretty famous. Solstice, IQ, and this is the band I'm not familiar with, Quasar. Now there's another band that's in the mix who I'm never sure with the Enid exactly when they started. So yeah, they were pretty early on. I worked with, this was during a period of time when I was working in an immunology lab, I think I think I was just moving over to microbiology, and my senior tech, the guy that was over me in the immunology department, was quite a big prog fan, and I remember him going on about the Enid. They used to play quite regularly at one of the festivals. I can't remember whether it was Reading or one of the other ones around that time. And they sort of fused rock with classical, heavy influenced by Vaughan Williams. So they were getting played a lot around that time as well. So that's the sort of, neo-prog, rock classical, if you like, ecosystem around that time. I can see they're also in this article name-checking things like Rush albums from that period where they were getting a bit more of a keyboard sound introduced into that. So that might have been aligning them slightly closer with a lot of the neo-prog bands who had like heavy key, a really, really heavy keyboard sound featured in there. This is the timeline on the back. So I just wanted to show you something that I think I'd mentioned already, where you've got the, I suppose some people might call this the classic lineup. I'm most familiar with these 4 albums here, and certainly the first album, the one we're talking about today, is my favourite. Slightly different lineup you can see here that recorded it, although the original drummer left slightly after that. And you can see there's quite a bit of movement in the band prior to that album. But after the album was released, it was a steady lineup over the course of 3 albums. If you look at their studio albums, so the era here, these 4, which would be the sort of Fish era as the singer. But yeah, still putting out stuff today. I think they're famous for being crowdfunding pioneers. They were one of the first artists to actually do that. So back to the album itself. And again, I'll just be talking about it from the UK lens mainly. So 14th of March. Got to number 7, spent 31 weeks in the UK album charts, achieved platinum. Only studio album to feature the band's original drummer and founding member. New wave of British prog rock. So on the original album, there's just 6 tracks. They're all pretty long, as you can see, capping in at 46 minutes. So that just squeezed on vinyl. I actually have a cassette of the album. Well, I don't have it anymore, but that would be what I originally bought, the version I bought it in, because I wanted to play it in my car. I do have this version, the CD version with the EP, which we'll talk about in a moment, their first single, their first EP, and then these demos as well. So that's the version I have on CD. Also have an interesting DVD that they did, which is a full performance of the album. And I'm not quite sure when that was done in the 80s, but yeah, I have that as well. That's the lineup at the time, which we've already seen. A couple of additional musicians. You can see, and this is a result of the extended CD version of the album. You've obviously got slightly different producers for those early tracks. And then we have the charts. I don't know if you can hear Yowly Cat is putting in an appearance in the background. I don't know whether that's being picked up. So thanks once again to Yowly Cat. So yeah, number 7 UK albums, US Billboard 200, 175. It's interesting here why this would suddenly chart on these particular charts. I'm sure I'll find out after the video. 300,000 sales. That is in the UK, went platinum. So just switching over to album of the year to just place this on a popularity line in terms of how they calculate their popularity figures. So third down the list, no surprise really to see this up there. And we'll talk a little bit about this in passing in a moment as to why this is probably considered to be their most popular album. And we can do that by looking at the album releases with respect to the official UK charts. So here's this week's album we're talking about, and you can see number 7, Fugazi, second album, number 5. This is I believe this was a live album. So then we got the third album, went to number 1, Clutching at Straws, number 2. This is an interesting album. So this is just B-sides. It includes also some of the tracks from that first EP, so it's got Grendel on it. And this really was the album in which I reintroduced myself to the band. So listened to them quite a bit, first 2 albums, and then I bought this when it came out, and it made me sort of re-listen to that and got quite interested in tracks I hadn't listened to for a long time, like Grendel and, was it 3 Boats Down from the Candy, I think it is. And other tracks like Tucson and was it Charting the Single, I think, quite a lot of the B-sides. So that gives us some clue as to why obviously this is the most popular album in terms of album of the year. It's sort of reflected by their chart success. But the other thing, if we look at the singles, you'll notice that we've got tracks like Kaylee, Lavender, Heart of Lothian. This was when they were having their real single success, 85. So these are the 2 singles from the album. This is the non-album first single from the band, and then this is their real big singles chart success in the UK. You can see they're on a pretty big label, EMI. So yeah. So this was a period where they're very much in, the national psyche, if you like, in the UK. And then as you go on, you can see their chart success sort of starts to peter off. Interestingly, we've got one here, it went to number 7 in 2004. So let's look at this from a slightly different angle, if you like. So, or a maybe slightly better overview, because this shows us the mapping onto the albums. So here's our tracks off of Misplaced Childhood, Kaylee, Lavender, Heart of Lothian, particularly Kaylee and Lavender. It's funny because the other thing I think of this time, I had 2 people I knew who are really big into Marillion, and they'd really get quite excited when this came on the pub jukebox. So I don't normally talk about non-album tracks, but I think this is really important in this instance. So before they released the singles off of the album, and even before they released the album, this was their first release, Market Square Heroes, with the B-side of 3 Boats Down from the Candy and Grendel, 25th of October 1982. So it predates everything. Now it's an EP in terms of overall length, because Grendel's just 17 minutes 15. I love this track. 17 minutes 15 of awesomeness. And if you were to ask me what my favourite Marillion track, it's this. But not really chart material, so it's obviously on the B side. And you'll see in a moment, we got that classic early release lag where the single gets released, an album gets released, singles off of that, and then this sort of goes back up the charts in the middle of when they're having their later single success, and we'll see that manifest itself in a moment. So just looking at this pre-album single, so non-album single, you can see, looking at the release date, 25th of October 82, it doesn't really, the highest point on the chart, and it's not even in the top 40, is well into 83, so after the album has been released, of which it's not on. Well, except later when you buy, obviously, the extended CD, like I did. So I'm just curious what that was alongside when it finally got into the charts. So we have, and this is where it's really funny, you have a prog band. Admittedly, they're not in the top 40 yet, but they're getting there, and you'll see in a moment they do. But you've got it alongside all this sort of new romantic stuff. True by Spandau Ballet, Temptation Heaven 17, Tears for Fears, Power Shelter. You've got like a lot of synth pop kicking around. Let's Dance, David Bowie. That was a huge album this period. Beat It by Michael Jackson was huge. Culture Club were huge. Eurythmics were huge. New Order, Blue Monday. They'd released, was it Power, Corruption and Lies that year. But then you had bands like Iron Maiden kicking around. I think I saw Saxon lurking around. Oh, Twisted Sister, of course. Kiss, yeah. So, we're entering in as well to the era when Twisted Sister got big as a result of MTV. Thin Lizzy, Thunder and Lightning. Oh, there's Saxon, Power and the Glory. And then there we have the single from Marillion. So that's highest position. So now on to the actual singles off the album. So that's the EP that was released before it. It's not on the album. So He Knows You Know, 31st of January 1983. Gets to its highest position pretty, fairly quickly after it's released, within a couple of weeks. And so this is, if we go here, you can sort of see 6th of February. So that gets on the charts. The album's released in March, and then the one we just looked at, Market Square Heroes. The one we just looked at, Market Square Heroes, then has a resurgence as a result of combination of the singles and the albums, and the album and the singles that are off of it. So what does that put it alongside? So that's a period just before where we looked at, because the period before was in, sorry about jumping around here, May. So the period before it, we got Men at Work, Catch a Goo Goo, Eddie Grant, Tears for Fears. Oh, Phil Collins was in the Ascendancy, Echo and the Bunnymen. I think I saw Toto lurking around in the singles charts. And some point, Big Country. Here we got this is around the time of Thin Lizzy's last lineup when Phil Lynott was still alive. And there's He Knows You Know. New entry at number 35, so it did get into the top 40, but didn't stay in. Then we have Garden Party, so 6th of June. So, by then we'd had, the album was out. We had the first single off the album had got into the top 40. The single previous to that, the EP, the non-album single, had gone back into the charts. And then we have this released in June. And so that gets to number 16. Again, pretty soon after it's released. And alongside that, You have Every Breath You Take. So this is what's in the charts at the time, singles charts. China Girl. So there's singles coming off that Let's Dance album. You've got Flashdance, Wham, Elton John, Yazoo. So all these synth pop bands as well in here. And you can see the smile on my face because a big country as well. So, there's like Celtic rock bands. We saw U2 as well. Heaven 17 have actually got 2 singles in the top 40. True's still kicking around. That's like slowly going out. More Toto because they were having a bit of a moment at that point. So, and yeah, it does make me smile when you think, you have all of them in the charts. And then you have this single as well, working its way up the charts and coming in the charts at number 16. Either side you've got Shack Attack and Kajagoogoo. And funny as well, like Mike Oldfield was having chart success with Moonlight Shadow. Yeah, so fun times. And yeah, when I look at this chart in particular, it does really take me back to a certain period. This felt like a really long summer. I just finished my second year of my BTEC. I was working, but I was doing college. And the first year of my HTEC, my higher national certificate, HTEC, started in, I think, September of 83. And so there was this lovely summer between the two. And I remember probably just trying to remember when that would have been. So yeah, probably pre this, just sometime around May, maybe June. I took a trip down to Cornwall, camping with a friend, and we had an awesome time. And then we came back, and there was a couple of new people started at the firm where I worked, and yeah, this was just an awesome period from September through to really the end of the year, until there was massive changes at work, and I lost touch with a lot of people as the firm that I was working for was sort of split up and moved around to different parts of the country. But yeah, this just reminds me of those fun times, like going clubbing as well, and listening in parallel, listening to all this heavier music that I was listening to at the time, alongside all the pop stuff that I was being exposed to. And I had a friend who spent a lot of times overseas at that point, and he would regularly come back to the UK and say, "Oh, have you listened to this band yet?" And so there was stuff that he was listening to over in Europe, and getting me onto stuff that way. So I thought it'd be interesting to just look at the music of the UK in the 1980s, and I'll try and just highlight those bands that would have been, or those movements that would have been big around that time. So certainly New Wave and the New Romantics, post-punk, and you've already seen a number of albums and singles which would fall into this category. Gothic Rock as well, Bauhaus, Sisters of Mercy. Yeah, they've been kicking around a lot, early 80s, probably got bigger around, when did I see them, 85, and then sort of fell apart, and then reformed. I've seen them a couple of times now, in their original configuration, just before Gary Marks left the band, and then they completely fractured sometime after that. And yeah, so that brings back a lot of memories of a bit later, 85, a couple of years later. Indie rock, the Smiths, and of course bands like New Order that have been around for a while. Heavy metal, Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, Saxon. They were still having some degree of chart success in the early to mid 80s. Grindcore was a little bit later. I wasn't that into that yet. That was more mid to late 80s. And then folk punk as well, bands like the Pogues. And Billy Bragg, we'll see in a moment, I think had an album out around this time period. And I got introduced to him through a friend, actually. And then things like synth pop and high energy, UK soul, hip hop, in some rather strange guises. Yeah, so very interesting times. So again, just trying to get a bit of a helicopter view here of now like 83 in terms of like what was top of the pile and they were sort of, competing against in those early days of chart success and when the singles came out on the album. So you've got best-selling albums, Thriller, No Parlay. So a number of these albums were probably out maybe the previous year. Yeah, The Police, Synchronicity, that was really big this year. Sweet Dreams Are Made of This by Eurythmics. Oh yeah, Big Country, The Crossing, of course. War by U2. Under Blood Red Sky, their live album. More Eurythmics, Yazoo, Toto 4, there's a massive album for Toto that spilled over into 83, released in 82. Then of course you've got Lionel Richie with, what's it that from that period? Was it Dancing on a Ceiling and Hello, I think? So that would have been, was it Can't Slow Down? Those would have been the release off of those. So yeah, that was a little later in the year actually, more October 83. And then the singles, you can see same sort of bands. And yeah, I mean, speaking of neo-prog, original prog bands like Genesis with Mama. South Africa by Toto. Yeah. And Slade. So who would have thought it? Yeah. They were having a bit of a resurgence in the early 80s, early to mid 80s, as a result of a impromptu appearance earlier on in the 80s at Reading Festival. That was the year that Ozzy dropped out and they were put on and they went down a storm and had a second career, which was really good for them. And then just looking specifically at the period at the start of 83, some of the albums here, well, I can see at least one, which I would have mentioned in a previous Album Musings episode. So Pyromania by Def Leppard. You've got stuff like Making Contact by UFO. I really actually like this album. I don't think it was super popular at the time. Frontiers by Journey. So yeah, this would have been the sort of stuff that I was listening to. But yeah, we had things like Eurythmics on the radio. I had, again, a couple of friends that were really into the Eurythmics. I remember this album. I bought that when it came out. Subterranean Jungle. War, I didn't buy till the following year. But yeah, the Rock Goddess album. What else have we got here? Oh, Thunder and Lightning by Thin Lizzy. And then we have Script for a Jester's Tear. Power and the Glory by Saxon. Eliminator by ZZ Top. Yeah. It's interesting to see what they were alongside. And then you sort of move on a little bit later. Here's Let's Dance by David Bowie. So we saw how the later singles were vying up against some of the singles off of here. And Pulp, people forget Pulp were kicking around in this time period. They've been around for a long time. Flock of Seagulls. There's a Madness US compilation. Out of Step by Minor Threat. That was 83. It's going to be interesting. At some point I will do one of those sort of non-talking videos where I just show up all the albums that were released from a certain year. And as you probably guess from the two I've released, there's a pattern here. It's all albums that are, either 10 years, 20 years, 30, 40, and I'm sort of working back. So I did a 2013, then I did a 2003 last week. At some point I'll do a 93, and then I'll get to 83, and then I'll probably do a 73. I'm sticking on, basically it has to be a time period when I was living in the UK. Well, actually no, that's not true, because the 2013 wasn't. But sorry, it'll be a time period during my lifetime. So I'm not going to do 63, but I'm going to take a look at 73. I'll probably stick to a period when I was still buying albums, or started buying albums, or still buying them. So that would be probably from the 80s through to the 2000s. Yeah, around that period. Slightly scratching the 20, because by the 2011s, 2012s, I'd stopped buying stuff, and it was obviously streaming by then. So yeah, but anyway, you know the ones I'm sort of talking about, them and turning up on the channel. So I'm looking forward to doing a 1983 one. Oh, this Peace of Mind by Iron Maiden. Holy Diver by Dio. Wow. Yeah, back to Mystery City. So you can see just the musical diversity that it was competing with, in terms of, obviously you can look at any one of these Wikipedia entries from a year and it looks really diverse, but a lot of this stuff was filtering through to the UK charts. You couldn't really say the same if you look through a Wikipedia article on album releases at the moment. A lot of bands in there wouldn't be getting exposure at all on the UK charts necessarily. So yeah, interesting to look at. Oh, Mental Health by Quiet Riot. Oh, I missed that. That was last week. So yeah, I remember that album. Wow. One of my brothers owned that, and we played that to death. And of course that had a tie-in. There was a Slade cover on there as well. Come On Feel the Noise. So yeah, Slade doing double duty, as a pick for a cover and as a result of their popularity for that Reading Festival appearance in the 80s. So thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in the next video.